the center of this tragic story were the Martins, an apparently typical family residing in the coastal town of Seaview Heights. This family made the grave mistake of welcoming a stranger into their home, leading to devastating consequences. Trust was shattered, lives were lost, and perhaps the most frightening aspect was that the offender nearly evaded justice. Seaview Heights, known for its charming lighthouses and tranquil beaches, would soon be shaken by a scandal that would tarnish its reputation forever. The Martins, Peter, his wife Emily, and their 3 lovely children, Max, Sierra, and little Betty, appeared to embody the ideal family. Peter was known for his charisma and striking looks, while Emily, a devoted schoolteacher, represented grace and kindness, beloved by her students and respected by her peers. They lived in a stunning house with an ocean view and seemed to enjoy a fulfilling and happy life. Yet, as the pressures of work and family intensified, cracks began to appear in their relationship. Now, let me introduce an essential character in this narrative, Chloe Turner, a college student who had recently moved to Seaview Heights. On a warm, breezy afternoon, Chloe first arrived in Seaview Heights. The town's peaceful vibe and scenic views had captivated her. The air was fresh, the streets calm, so different from the hectic city life she was used to. Chloe was a college student with ambitious dreams and a resolute spirit, eager to start anew in this lovely town. One day, while exploring the charming streets and admiring the quaint shops and historic architecture, she spotted a for sale sign in front of a stunning oceanfront home. Curious, she approached the property for a closer look. As luck would have it, Peter Martin was there, showing the house to a potential buyer. He noticed Chloe by the gate and, with his signature charm, walked over to greet her. He asked with a friendly smile if she was interested in the house. Chloe, slightly taken aback by his sudden approach, quickly composed herself. She quickly retorted that she was just admiring the beautiful view, complimenting the house as a lovely property. Peter nodded, his professional instincts kicking in. He began introducing himself and told her he was the real estate agent handling this sale. He went on to tell her that if she ever needed any help with properties around here, she should feel free to reach out. They chatted for a few more minutes, discussing the town, the house, and Chloe's recent move. As their conversation flowed naturally, Chloe casually mentioned her search for a job. She said she had been desperately seeking one, and since she was new to this small town, nobody trusted her enough to give her a job. She went ahead to ask Mr. Martin if he knew anyone who could give her a part-time job, at least to support her finances for college. Peter's interest was piqued. He thought for a moment before responding. He remembered his wife, Emily, was always looking for help with their children and around the house. He told Chloe that his wife was a school teacher and things could get pretty hectic. He then asked for her contact information, promising to talk to his wife and see if they could arrange something. Chloe's eyes lit up with gratitude, and she thanked Mr. Martin for even considering her. Later that evening, Peter brought up the conversation with Emily. Over dinner, he explained how he had met Chloe and her situation. Emily, always compassionate and understanding, agreed to meet with Chloe. From the way her husband described the young woman, she sounded like a nice person. So Emily asked Peter to invite her over for dinner that weekend to see if she would be a nice fit. Chloe was thrilled when she received the call from Emily. She visited the Martins' home, and after a warm and welcoming interview, she was hired to help with the children and assist Emily around the house, offering Peter and Emily some much-needed respite from their demanding schedules. Chloe, with her bright smile and carefree spirit, quickly became a beloved figure in the household. The children adored her, and Emily appreciated the help. But for Peter, Chloe represented something more dangerous, an escape from the monotony of his life. At first, Peter's attraction to Chloe was a guilty secret, something he barely acknowledged even to himself. He admired her youth and vitality, qualities that seemed to be fading from his own wife and his own life. Chloe, for her part, simply enjoyed the attention of the handsome and successful Peter. She found his maturity and confidence appealing. This was very different from the boys her own age who were increasingly trying to get into her pants. And did I forget to mention, Chloe was super attractive and had a shapely figure, Before you knew it, their interactions, initially innocent, grew increasingly charged with unspoken desire. They both knew it was just a matter of time, and one day it finally happened. The affair began one sultry summer evening when Emily was attending a teachers' conference out of town. The sun had set, and Peter and Chloe found themselves alone in the house after the children had gone to bed. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop as they settled in the cozy living room. While casually discussing, they both decided to share a bottle of wine. Peter poured 2 glasses of the rich red wine, and they clinked their glasses in a casual toast. The conversation started light, but as the wine flowed, so did their words. Chloe, with her captivating blue eyes and infectious laughter, began to open up to Peter. She spoke of her struggles with college, balancing coursework, part-time jobs, and the pressure of expectations. Her dreams of a future where she could escape the confines of her current life and make something truly meaningful of herself were shared with the kind of raw honesty that touched Peter deeply. Peter, feeling the effects of the wine and the intimate setting, found himself sharing more than he usually would. He talked about his career, how despite his success, he felt a gnawing dissatisfaction. The passion he once had for real estate had dwindled, replaced by the monotonous grind of daily work. He confided in Chloe about his fading connection with Emily, the woman he once adored, now seemingly distant and preoccupied with her own life and career. As the night wore on, the conversation took on a more personal and intimate tone. Peter and Chloe's eyes locked more frequently, their gazes lingering a bit too long. The atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken desires and forbidden thoughts. Chloe shifted closer to Peter, her knee brushing against his, sending a shiver down his spine. He could smell the faint scent of her perfume, and the delicate floral fragrance began to fill the space between them. Peter felt a magnetic pull toward Chloe, a young woman who represented everything he felt he was missing: youth, spontaneity, and an untapped passion for life. Their first kiss was hesitant, a sign that they were crossing over into forbidden territory. Peter leaned in slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Chloe's breath hitched as their lips met, and yes, they kissed, a kiss that spoke volumes of their suppressed desires. It was a brief stolen moment filled with the electricity of new and forbidden attraction. Once that line was crossed, there was no turning back. The kiss quickly escalated into a heated embrace. Their bodies pressed together as they explored this newfound connection. The room seemed to disappear around them, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of intense, unbridled passion. They stumbled toward the couch, hands fumbling, hearts racing as they gave into the lust that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. Their affair quickly escalated, fueled by a combination of lust and a desire for something more than their current lives offered. It was a dangerous game they were playing, one that promised pleasure, but threatened to destroy everything they held dear. But in that moment, neither Peter nor Chloe cared about the consequences. They were consumed by a desire that burned brighter than the summer sun setting over Seaview Heights. Peter and Chloe's secret meetings became a regular occurrence, each escapade more daring than the last. They met in the house when Emily was out at motels on the outskirts of town, and even in the secluded corners of Seaview Heights' picturesque parks. Each encounter was a mix of passion and peril, the thrill of their illicit relationship overshadowing the reality of their betrayal. They became so skilled at this that Emily had no idea something this horrible was going on in her house. But even though they were very good at hiding this, they could not hide this forever. One afternoon, while Emily was out running errands, their oldest son, Max, was feeling a bit sick and came home early from school. He quietly entered the house, heading to his room to drop off his backpack. As he passed the living room, he heard muffled voices. Curious, he peeked around the corner and saw his father and Chloe locked in a passionate embrace. Shocked and frightened, Max backed away, but Chloe noticed at him. She called out his name sweetly, her tone denying the anger in her eyes. She asked him to come over for just a moment. What did she plan to do? Peter must have wondered with shame and deep regret in his eyes. Terrified, Max hesitated, telling her he needed to go to his room, and he quickly turned to leave, but Chloe was faster. She grabbed him by the arm, her grip like iron. This time around, her once calm and soft demeanor switched to one that was very dangerous. She threatened him, spitting vehemently that he, Max, should not dare tell anyone about this. If not, and here was the disturbing part, she literally threatened to murder him if he spoke about this to anyone. Peter was dumbstruck and touched Chloe, trying to signal to her that maybe she had taken this too far, but she hissed, her facade of kindness slipping. Max nodded, his eyes wide with fear. He tried to pull away, but Chloe's grip tightened. She demanded that Max promise her to keep shut, and Max, being an innocent child, quickly agreed with tears streaming down his face. Satisfied, Chloe released him, and he fled to his room. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew palpable. Emily sensed something was terribly wrong, not just with Peter, but with Max as well. He had become withdrawn and anxious, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Emily's concern deepened, but Max refused to confide in her. Meanwhile, Chloe's threat to their son also seemed to switch on the light bulb of common sense in Peter. He began wondering if this was all worth it. He started planning and preparing how he was going to tell his wife about the whole issue so both of them could work together to kick Chloe out of their lives. But he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Emily began to notice even more devastating changes in Peter. He became more distant, his affection for her seeming forced. His late nights at the office and sudden business trips raised her suspicions, but she dismissed them, attributing his behavior to stress. It wasn't until one evening when a loud noise shattered the evening calm that the true horror began to unfold. Emily was away with the kids at her mother's house, and one of the neighbors, Mrs. Caldwell, rushed over to the Martins' house, her heart pounding. She had no idea what she would find, but feared the worst. The sight that greeted her was more gruesome than she could have imagined. Peter Martin lay motionless in a pool of his own blood, his eyes lifeless and body still. Mrs. Caldwell let out a piercing scream that reverberated through the entire neighborhood. And before you knew it, people gathered around to know what happened. The shock spread quickly through the neighborhood, and soon, detectives and investigators descended upon the Martin household, determined to uncover the truth behind Peter's untimely death. That same night, Emily and the kids had to rush home when the police informed Emily that her attention was needed at home, saying something had happened to her husband. They refused to let her know any more information, and this drove her to madness. She quickly put her kids in the car and drove at an extremely high speed for more than 3 hours just to find out what had happened. She kept dialing her husband's phone as she drove, but there was no answer. She feared the worst. She called Chloe and asked her if she knew if anything had happened. Chloe claimed that there was a ruckus around the house, and the police also prevented her from entering. She further added that she had been out of town that day and just came in to meet the disturbance in the neighborhood. Emily finally arrived, and immediately she saw her husband's lifeless body, which forensics were still trying to figure out his cause of death. She broke down. Why had this happened? Everybody loved Peter. Even those who were somewhat jealous of his life didn't hate him. Who would do this? The police allowed her to have her moment before asking her if there was anyone she thought could be responsible for this. But nothing. No one came to her mind. Peter was an almost perfect man, a wonderful husband, and the best father. He was charismatic, but kind, and he would always help whoever needed help. She couldn't think of one person who would want to murder Peter. They also questioned Chloe, and she, with tears in her eyes, told them she was out of town because she had a test to write. When they called the college to find out if Chloe was present for the test, it turned out that her alibi checked out. They asked Max, who was the oldest of the kids, if he also knew anything that could help them find out his dad's killer, but Max said he knew nothing. Max was already burdened with the weight of his secret, and he grew even more despondent. He was haunted by the sight of his father's body, knowing deep down that Chloe had to be involved somehow. Every glance at her filled him with dread and anger, the memory of her threat echoing in his mind. Unable to bear the tension any longer, he decided to confront her. One evening, while Emily was out trying to manage the overwhelming grief that had consumed her life, Max found Chloe alone in the kitchen. The air was thick with unspoken words as he approached her, his heart pounding. "Why did you do it?" Max whispered fiercely, his eyes burning with a mix of fear and fury. "I know it was you. You killed my dad." Chloe's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. She told Max that he had no idea of what he was talking about. "Max, be careful with your accusations," she spat out. Max, determined and manlier than ever, took a step closer, his fist clenched at his sides. This time, he was the one issuing the threat. He told her to leave and that if she didn't, he was going to tell his mother about the affair and everything. He couldn't bear to stand her. He wasn't sure if she was actually responsible for the death of his father, but he just couldn't stand the sight of her. In an instant, Chloe's demeanor changed from defensive to predatory. She lunged at Max, but he managed to evade her grasp and bolted toward the kitchen doorway. Chloe, driven by a mix of panic and rage, grabbed a knife from the counter and chased after him, her footsteps pounding against the hardwood floor. Max screamed as she caught up to him, the knife plunging into his shoulder, narrowly missing his vital organs. The pain was searing, but the terror was worse. He collapsed to the floor, blood oozing from the wound. His cry echoed through the house, and Chloe, realizing the gravity of her actions, fled in fear, dropping the knife with a metallic clatter. Max, bleeding and terrified, called out for his mother, who rushed out and ran to the phone to call the police and an ambulance for help. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights shining brightly on the walls as they searched for Chloe, while Max was rushed to the hospital as he was losing blood and losing it fast. His life was now at stake, and Emily was in a dilemma. She could not lose both her husband and her only son. But it wasn't long before they found Chloe hiding in the darkened alleyway behind a row of shops, her face streaked with tears and her mind racing. She was brought in, her facade of innocence shattered. Under intense interrogation, Chloe confessed to murdering Peter. Her voice was cold and devoid of remorse as she recounted how Peter had ended the affair, telling her he couldn't continue and demanding she leave his life. He had threatened to confess everything to Emily and file a restraining order against Chloe, ensuring she would never find work in Seaview Heights again. Enraged and desperate, she had snapped. As Peter turned his back and walked away, giving her a moment to think, she had seized the opportunity and stabbed him, the knife plunging into his back as he fell to the floor. Emily was devastated. The revelation of her husband's infidelity was overshadowed by the unbearable loss of his life. She didn't care about the betrayal. She just wanted him back, but it was too late. The tragic sequence of events had irrevocably shattered the Martin family and left a permanent scar on the once serene town of Seaview Heights. Max, recovering from his wound, was plagued by nightmares of the night he had confronted Chloe. He felt a crushing guilt for not having spoken up sooner, for not being able to prevent his father's death. Emily, struggling to hold her family together, could see the toll it was taking on him. She tried to reach out to offer comfort, but Max remained distant, his eyes haunted. The community, now aware of the dark secrets that had lurked beneath the surface of the seemingly perfect family, struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. The lighthouses and serene beaches, once symbols of peace and tranquility, now seemed to bear witness to the haunting tale of love, betrayal, and murder that would forever stain their reputation. Whispers of the Martins' downfall spread through the town, and to be honest, the only word we could use to describe this was unbelievable. Emily found herself drowning in grief, her once beautiful life shattered. She couldn't even bring herself to feel anger towards Peter for his betrayal. The loss of him was too overwhelming. She spent countless nights gazing at the ocean, its waves crashing rhythmically, a painful reminder of a life once brimming with promise. Chloe's trial became a focal point for the town, attracting curious onlookers and significant media coverage. Her cold, calculated demeanor on the stand sent shivers down the spines of those who watched. She exhibited no remorse as she recounted the events leading up to Peter's murder, her voice chillingly detached. Max, still struggling with his trauma, was called to testify. In the courtroom, he recounted the horrific night he confronted Chloe, his voice trembling yet resolute. His testimony revealed the dark truth about Chloe's nature. As the trial concluded, the jury deliberated briefly before finding Chloe guilty of first-degree murder. Her sentence was swift and harsh, delivering justice to the shattered Martin family. In the aftermath, Emily, Max, and her 7-year-old and 3-year-old daughters tried to rebuild their lives. The once beautiful home had become a place of painful memories, prompting Emily to sell the house, hoping a fresh start might facilitate healing. They relocated to a different town, away from the prying eyes and whispers, but the scars remained. Seaview Heights, forever altered by the tragedy, struggled to regain its former charm. The lighthouses and beaches continued to attract tourists, but the story of the Martins lingered, a cautionary tale of hidden secrets and the darkness that can hide beneath even the most seemingly perfect lives. On the March 6, 2019, Michelle Blackwood, a renowned art dealer and socialite, laid lifeless on the marble floor of her foyer. Her body was positioned in an eerie pose as if carefully placed by the killer. The multiple stab wounds to her chest seemed almost surgical, an indicator of the precision of the murder. A small pool of blood had formed around her like a dark halo, and her eyes were frozen in a permanent stare as if she had seen her own demise approaching. Her husband, Nicholas Blackwood, stood there in shock together with the Winchesters, Alan and Malia. The Blackwoods' maid stood behind them, all shocked by the sight before them. The police began to investigate the murder, but little did they know that the secret they would find would leave them shocked. Nicholas Blackwood was a formidable figure in the business world, celebrated for his acumen and drive as the CEO of Blackwood Industries. Born in 1975 in Chicago, Illinois, his rise from humble beginnings was nothing short of remarkable. Raised by a hardworking single mother, Nicholas's early life was marked by struggle and perseverance. Driven by a desire to escape his circumstances, he excelled academically and earned a scholarship to the prestigious University of Chicago Booth School of Business in 1993. Upon graduating with an MBA in 1997, he started his career in a small real estate firm where his innate talent for spotting potential and turning struggling assets into profitable ventures quickly set him apart. By 2005, Nicholas had already made a name for himself in the business world. And in 2010, he founded Blackwood Industries, which rapidly expanded into a global conglomerate under his leadership. His success was marked by his ability to navigate complex financial landscapes and his uncanny ability to predict market trends. Under his leadership, the company flourished, becoming a significant player in each sector. His reputation as a savvy businessman and a charismatic leader spread, earning him respect and influence across the corporate world. Nicholas' life seemed to epitomize success from his thriving career to his opulent lifestyle, and he appeared to have it all. Michelle Blackwood, his wife, was a prominent figure in the art world. Known for her sophisticated taste and keen eye for emerging talent, Michelle had made a name for herself as a celebrated art dealer since opening her own gallery in 2008. Her presence at high-profile gallery events and charity galas such as the 2012 Venice Biennale and the 2015 Met Gala was always noted, and she had a reputation for bringing a touch of elegance to every occasion. Michael's career and social standing complemented Nicholas' own, and together, they formed a glamorous couple admired by their peers. They had married in 2007, and their union, which had spanned 12 years, appeared to be the epitome of success and stability. By 2019, Michelle's gallery had become a leading destination for contemporary art, solidifying her position as a respected figure in the art world. Nicholas and Michelle Blackwood first met Alan and Malia Winchester at a high-profile charity gala in Manhattan on November 10, 2012. The event, held at one of the city's grandest venues, was a gathering of influential figures from various sectors, including art, finance, and technology. Michelle, renowned for her role in the art world, was a guest of honor, and Nicholas, as a prominent CEO, was there to support his wife and contribute to the event's success. Alan Winchester, a charismatic and affluent businessman, was immediately drawn to Michelle's grace and insight during the evening. Malia, equally charming and well-connected, quickly struck up a conversation with Nicholas. The four of them found themselves engaged in lively discussions about art, business, and high society, their mutual interests creating an immediate bond. The conversation flowed effortlessly, with Michelle and Malia discussing their favorite artists and upcoming exhibitions, while Nicholas and Alan shared insights into the latest business trends and investment opportunities. The chemistry between the couples was undeniable, and what began as casual conversation quickly deepened into a genuine friendship. As the evening progressed, the Winchesters invited the Blackwoods to their home for a more intimate gathering. The invitation was eagerly accepted, and soon the two couples were spending weekends together, attending events and exploring their shared interests. Their friendship grew stronger over time, with frequent dinners, cultural outings, and collaborative charity efforts. It was during one of these gatherings that the topic of unconventional lifestyles and personal experimentation came up. Alan and Malia, known for their adventurous spirit, introduced the idea of a wife-swapping arrangement, suggesting it as a way to add excitement and variety to their lives. Nicholas and Michelle, intrigued by the idea and looking for a new dynamic in their relationship, agreed to explore this new arrangement. The mutual respect and trust between the Blackwoods and the Winchesters made this arrangement seem like a natural extension of their friendship. The couple's interactions, initially marked by curiosity and enthusiasm, soon became a regular part of their social lives. The wife-swapping arrangement was initially intended as an adventurous diversion from their high-profile lives, providing excitement and novelty. It quickly became a regular part of their social interactions, blending the personal and professional spheres of their lives. Alan and Malia's influence on the Blackwoods was significant, and their mutual engagement in this unconventional lifestyle began to complicate their relationships. Around 2017, Michelle Blackwood and Alan Winchester, who had been engaging in a wife-swapping arrangement with their partners, began to develop strong emotional bonds with each other. Their physical intimacy, which had started as a thrilling experiment, had evolved into a deep connection. They found themselves craving each other's company, sharing secrets, and exploring desires they had never known before. As their relationship became more intimate, Michelle and Alan struggled to maintain the boundaries of their arrangement. They began to question whether their feelings for each other were merely a product of their fantasy or something more profound. Meanwhile, Nicholas and Malia, oblivious to the growing intensity between their partners, continued to enjoy the benefits of their unconventional arrangement. They started to secretly meet outside of their arranged wife-swapping encounters. Stolen moments, hidden glances, and whispered promises became a regular part of their lives. When they were together with their respective partners, Nicholas and Malia, for their wife-swapping sessions, Michelle and Alan couldn't help but feel a spark that they no longer felt with their own spouses. During these sessions, they would often find themselves lost in each other's eyes, their passion and intimacy with each other surpassing anything they experienced with their own partners. They began to crave each other's touch, and their encounters became more intense and satisfying than ever before. Nicholas and Malia, still oblivious to the growing connection between their partners, continued to participate in the wife-swapping arrangement, unaware that their spouses had begun to emotionally and physically check out of their relationships. The fantasy that had once brought them all together was now threatening to tear them apart. On the night of March 5th, Michelle revealed the shocking news that she was carrying Alan's child. The room fell silent with tension and anger hanging in the air. Malia's face twisted in rage and betrayal, her eyes blazing with fury as she glared at Michelle. Her body language screamed hostility, her hands clenched into fists. Nicholas' face turned red with anger, his eyes wide with shock and hurt. He seemed frozen, unable to process the news. Alan took a step forward, trying to defuse the situation, but Malia's glare stopped him in his tracks. His eyes darted between Michelle and Malia, unsure of what to do next. The atmosphere was electric with tension, the relationships between the two couples on the brink of collapse. The wife-swapping fantasy had turned into a nightmare, and it seemed that there was no turning back. On the March 6th, Michelle Blackwood laid in her own pool of blood. Shortly after the body was found, the police started to work on their case. The detectives had been briefed on the circumstances surrounding Michelle Blackwood's murder. The only others present at the time of the murder were her husband, Nicholas Blackwood, their neighbors, the Winchesters, and the Blackwoods' maid, Annabeth. A medical examiner arrived at the crime scene. The medical examiner's report indicated that Michelle's death was caused by exsanguination from multiple stab wounds, likely inflicted with a letter opener. The examiner's hypothesis proposed that the killing was a deliberate act, given the organized crime scene and lack of signs of forced entry or struggle. This suggested that the killer may have been someone known to Michelle, who had access to the mansion and had planned the attack in advance. The same statement was given by Nicholas and the Winchesters when they were questioned by the police. They were asked about their whereabouts on the day of Michelle's death, and they all claimed to have been in different parts of the mansion, unaware of the events that happened. Their alibis were checked, but there was no other staff or witness to confirm their corroborating statements. However, the police still suspected that one of them might be hiding something, and they continued to investigate further. The investigation was ongoing, and the police were following up on several leads. Meanwhile, the statements given by Nicholas and the Winchesters were being scrutinized for any inconsistencies or potential clues that might have been missed. They said that Annabeth, the maid, was the one who had screamed and alerted them to Michelle's lifeless body. They claimed that they had been summoned to the scene by Annabeth's frantic cries for help and that they had been unaware of the events leading up to Michelle's death until that moment. Annabeth was questioned further, and she recounted her version of events. She claimed that she had been upstairs going about her daily routine when she heard Michelle's voice coming from downstairs. She said that Michelle was speaking with someone, but she couldn't make out who it was or what they were saying. As she came downstairs to investigate, she witnessed a horrific scene. She saw Michelle being stabbed multiple times by an unknown assailant who then turned and fled the scene. Annabeth claimed that she was too shocked and frightened to intervene, and that she had immediately called out for help and alerted Nicholas and the Winchesters. However, the police noticed that Annabeth's story seemed rehearsed, and that she was being evasive about certain details. They pressed her for more information, but she insisted that she was telling the truth. The police were not convinced, and they continued to investigate Annabeth's involvement in Michelle's murder. That day, Michelle's body was taken for autopsy, and when the result came out, the medical examiner's report revealed that Michelle's body had signs of a fierce struggle, and she was indeed pregnant. Although no DNA was found on her body, one peculiar detail caught the investigators' attention. A small, almost imperceptible thread of fabric was lodged in the wound on her hand. Further analysis revealed that the thread matched the fabric of the Blackwoods' living room couch. This suggested that the killer may have been in the house, possibly sitting on the couch before or after the murder. The thread could have been torn from the couch when the killer stood up or moved around and accidentally got caught in Michelle's wound during the struggle. The next day, the police investigation continued with a series of separate interviews. Nicholas, still reeling from the loss of his wife, was questioned in one room, while the Winchesters, including their maid Annabeth, were questioned in another. When asked to provide a detailed account of their activities on the night before the murder, discrepancies emerged in their statements. Nicholas claimed he had been in his study, working late, and hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. Alan said he had been watching TV in the room upstairs while Malia claimed she was in their bedroom, reading a book. However, Annabeth, the maid, revealed that she had seen Malia arguing with Michelle in the living room around 10 p.m. and later saw Alan together with Michelle around 10:30 p.m. The police noticed that the Winchester stories didn't match Annabeth's account, and the maid's revelation raised more questions. Who was telling the truth, and what were they hiding? The investigation was getting more complicated by the minute. The police probed Annabeth further, sensing she might be a crucial witness. They asked her to elaborate on the Winchesters' frequent visits to the Blackwoods residence. Annabeth hesitated, then revealed a shocking detail. She had noticed that the Winchesters in Blackwoods would swap wives during their get-togethers. It was a regular occurrence, and Annabeth had grown accustomed to seeing the couples switch partners. The police were stunned by this revelation. They had suspected an affair, but not a consensual wife-swapping arrangement between the two couples. The police brought Nicholas and the Winchesters in for further questioning, armed with the new information from Annabeth. They asked each of them separately if they had been involved in a wife-swapping arrangement, and to their surprise, all of them admitted to it. Nicholas, Alan, and Malia each confirmed that they had indeed been swapping partners, and that it had been a consensual agreement between the two couples. They claimed it was just a harmless experiment, a way to spice up their marriages and explore new connections. As the investigation continued, the spotlight fell on Malia and Nicholas, who now emerged as prime suspects in Michelle's murder. The police had discovered a clear motive: the pregnancy. With Alan's earlier revelation that Michelle was pregnant with his child, the police now had a solid reason to believe that Malia, as Alan's wife, would have had a strong motive to kill Michelle. Jealousy, betrayal, and a desire to protect her marriage could have driven Malia to commit the crime. Similarly, Nicholas, as Michelle's husband, would have had a motive to kill his wife if he felt betrayed by her infidelity and pregnancy with another man's child. His earlier alibi of working in his study now seemed shaky, and the police wondered if he might have been more involved in the events of that fateful night than he initially let on. The police decided to bring Malia and Nicholas in for further questioning, this time with a focus on their potential motives and any evidence that might link them to the crime. The police obtained DNA samples from Malia and Nicholas, hoping to find a match with any evidence collected from Michelle's body. However, after conducting thorough tests, they found no traces of their DNA on Michelle's body or at the crime scene. With no physical evidence linking them to the crime, the police were forced to release Malia and Nicholas from detention. Despite their suspicious behavior and questionable alibis, the lack of concrete evidence meant the police had no grounds to hold them. Their lawyers had been arguing for their release, citing the absence of any tangible proof connecting them to Michelle's murder. The police had searched their belongings, phones, and computers, but found nothing incriminating. No DNA, no fingerprints, no suspicious transactions or communications. It was as if they had been careful to cover their tracks, or perhaps they were simply telling the truth about their innocence. As the police struggled to find any physical evidence, the pressure from the lawyers and the court mounted. The police knew they couldn't hold Malia and Nicholas indefinitely without charging them. Reluctantly, they made the decision to release them, hoping that further investigation would uncover new leads. Malia and Nicholas left the detention center looking relieved, but still shaken by their ordeal. They maintained their innocence, claiming they had been wrongly accused and were grateful to be free once more. The police, however, remained skeptical, keeping them under surveillance as they continued their investigation. 2 days after releasing Malia and Nicholas, the police obtained a warrant to search the Blackwood residence. Meanwhile, Annabeth had been summoned the previous day for another round of questioning. During a routine questioning session, the police noticed a small cut on Annabeth's hand. They asked her about it, and she provided an explanation that raised suspicions. Her story seemed inconsistent and evasive, sparking the detective's interest. The cut on her hand looked too precise, too clean, to be from a broken glass. The police suspected a knife wound, and Annabeth's nervous behavior reinforced their doubts. The detectives decided to investigate further, obtaining a search warrant for the Blackwood residence. They arrived at the mansion armed with a team of forensic experts, state-of-the-art equipment, and a determination to find new evidence. The police had been granted a new search warrant, allowing them to scour the premises once again, this time with fresh eyes and advanced technology. As they stepped out of their vehicles, the team of forensic experts began to unload their gear, including specialized lights, cameras, and collection kits. The police officers, led by the determined detective, stood ready to assist, their eyes scanning the mansion's facade as if searching for any hint of what lay within. The team's mission was clear: to leave no stone unturned, no surface unexamined, and no potential evidence uncollected. They would re-question the staff, re-examine the crime scene, and reanalyze every shred of evidence previously collected. The search was meticulous, with every room and corner scoured for clues. And then, in the incinerator, they found it: the murder weapon. A kitchen knife, partially burned but still recognizable, was lodged in the ashes. The police carefully extracted the knife, taking care not to damage any potential evidence. They bagged it and sent it to the lab for analysis. The discovery of the murder weapon was a significant breakthrough in the case. The police now had physical evidence that could link the killer to the crime. They began to re-question Alan and Annabeth, who were still on house arrest, about the knife and the incinerator. The lab results revealed a shocking discovery. Annabeth's fingerprint was found on the handle of the kitchen knife. The police had previously collected her DNA and fingerprints during the initial investigation, which made it easy to match. With this new evidence, on March 20th, with enough evidence, the police immediately arrested Annabeth, charging her with Michelle's murder. She was taken into custody, her expression a mix of shock and fear. As the police questioned her further, she confessed. Annabeth revealed that Michelle had caught her stealing from the safe in the living room. Michelle had threatened to call the police, and a struggle ensued. In a panic, Annabeth's hand instinctively reached for the kitchen knife she had tried using to open the safe. She stabbed Michelle in a moment of desperation, not intending to kill. The police listened intently as Annabeth's confession poured out, revealing the events that led to Michael's tragic death. The investigation had finally uncovered the truth behind the murder. Annabeth's actions, driven by fear and desperation, had led to a devastating outcome. The police took Annabeth into custody, charging her with Michelle's murder. The defense tried to argue that Annabeth had acted in self-defense, but the prosecution countered that the evidence showed a clear intention to kill. After deliberating for hours, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced Annabeth to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read out, Annabeth's face crumpled, and she collapsed in her chair, overcome with grief and despair. The Blackwood family, who had been present throughout the trial, showed little emotion as the sentence was handed down. They had already lost Michelle, and now they saw justice served. As Annabeth was led away in handcuffs, she knew she would spend the rest of her life behind bars, haunted by the memory of the crime she had committed. The once quiet and unassuming maid had been revealed as a ruthless killer, and now she would pay the ultimate price. It was August 11th, 2008, Monday. Sarah Widmer, 24, was at home with her husband, 27-year-old Ryan Widmer. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist at a practice in Fort Thomas, Kentucky, while Ryan was a sports planner. That evening, they both went directly home after work to have dinner together. Sarah and Ryan met through mutual friends and went on a blind date at a pub. They became inseparable, bought a house, and got married. Having been married for just 4 months, they were still very much newlyweds and were planning their future. For their honeymoon, they had gone to Costa Rica and were now planning a vacation to Cancun. But the most exciting plan was in relation to a new puppy. They were in the process of buying one together. That night, the night of August 11th, Ryan and Sarah had some leftover hamburgers, corn on the cob, and cheesy potatoes and watched a bit of TV. According to Ryan, they watched a few of Sarah's favorite shows before she let him switch over to a football game. Sarah then decided to take a bath in the bathroom in the master bedroom, and Ryan recalled her asking him to check the doors before he came upstairs. He remembered her walking upstairs after they both said, "I love you." She walks on her tippy toes as she often did. At 10:49 p.m. that night, Ryan called 911. The call lasted 7 minutes. He told the 911 dispatcher that his wife had fallen asleep in the bathtub at their home in Morrow, Ohio. Ryan told the dispatcher, "My wife, she fell asleep in the bathtub, I think. I was downstairs. I just came up here and she was laying face down in the bathtub." Ryan said that he was downstairs watching TV, and when he went upstairs he found Sarah in the bathtub laying face down. He told the dispatcher that she falls asleep in the tub all the time. The dispatcher told him to take Sarah out of the bathtub and talked him through how to do CPR. Ryan put the phone down as he emptied the bathtub and lifted Sarah from the bathtub. Took around 29 seconds. Ryan attempted CPR. Police were at his house within 6 minutes of him making the 911 call. They found Sarah lying naked in their bedroom. She was on the floor. Police noticed that her body was warm and dry, but her hair was wet. They tried CPR and noticed that a pinkish-white frothy discharge was coming out of Sarah's mouth and nose, signs that she had drowned. When the paramedics arrived, they made 2 attempts to intubate Sarah while in the bedroom. Both attempts were unsuccessful. They brought Sarah out into the ambulance and again tried to intubate her twice more. They spent 10 minutes working on her inside the ambulance before bringing her to hospital. Ryan went with her. There was a 5th intubation attempt which was unsuccessful. The 6th one was successful. It was made when she arrived at the hospital by the treating emergency room physician. But it was too late. That same night, Sarah was pronounced dead. Police spoke to Ryan at the hospital. Ryan told police that he was home alone that night with Sarah. Ryan said that he was watching a football game on TV downstairs and Sarah was taking a bath. It was 10 p.m. He told police he had been afraid she may fall asleep in the tub. Police asked him if Sarah had fallen asleep in the bathtub before. Ryan said no, but he said that Sarah would fall asleep in unusual places. Even though Ryan told police that he found Sarah in the bathtub and he believed she fell asleep, police were not so sure. They were suspicious when they had arrived at the house to find Sarah's body dry but her hair wet. They also believed there were inconsistencies in his story. He told the 911 dispatcher that he found Sarah in the bathtub laying face down, but they believe he told the nurse at the hospital that he found her laying face up. When police searched the Widmer's house, they observed that the bathroom floor, mat in the bathroom, and the towel on the floor were dry. The bathtub itself was mostly dry except for a few droplets around the drain. When they looked around the house, they found no wet towels. Police found what they believed were further inconsistencies in Ryan's account as to what happened that night. Ryan had told police that he was watching a football match, a Cincinnati Bengals football game, on the TV downstairs when Sarah went to take a bath. But the TV downstairs wasn't set on that channel when they checked. The TV in the bedroom was set to that channel. Police found bloodstains on the carpet in the bedroom. Sarah had been lying on the floor in the bedroom when police arrived. Dr. Russell Updegrove, the Warren County coroner, performed Sarah's autopsy. He determined that Sarah's death was caused by drowning. There was faint bruising on the right side of Sarah's forehead and a tetral hemorrhage on the inner surface of her eyelid, bruising on the left side of her neck, a contusion on the back of her neck, and a abrasion on her left armpit, and bruising and lacerations to her upper lip. Sarah had deep muscle hemorrhaging in the interior of her neck and contusions to her scalp. He determined that the manner of Sarah's death was a homicide. It was his opinion that the injuries Sarah sustained occurred before her death and were not consistent with injuries commonly resulting from CPR. Toxicology reports revealed there were no drugs or alcohol found in her system. On August 13, 2008, just 2 days after Sarah's death, Ryan was arrested on a charge of aggravated murder. It was the prosecution's case that Sarah died as a result of drowning. It was their case that the cause of Sarah's death was not so much as dispute, but the manner in which she died was, how did she drown? The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the scene, and Sarah's injuries were all enough to prove that Ryan killed her. He held her forcibly underwater, drowning her in the bathtub. Police dused the bath tube for fingerprint and found streak marks believed to have been made by human hands. The marks were located near the middle of the bath tube. Using a supergluey fuming process and reflective ultraviolet imaging, finger marks and smear marks were observed on the bathtub. A forearm impression was found on the bathtub, and the testing presence of hair follicles determined the impression was made by an adult male. But it could not be determined when it was made. Furthermore, the prosecution argued that there was nothing wet inside the bathroom. If Sarah had drowned and Ryan pulled her out of the bathtub, the floor should have been wet along with other items in the bathroom. They also alerted the jury to the fact that when police arrived, just minutes after Ryan called 911, Sarah's body was dry. They made reference to the 911 call, and it was their case that Ryan had said too much. He told the dispatcher what he had been doing that night. He was orchestrating the 911 call. The prosecution told the jury that there had been a violent confrontation in the Widmer home that night for reasons that were unknown. They called an expert to testify that it was virtually impossible to fall asleep and drown in the bathtub unless drugs and/or alcohol was involved. It was their testimony that the sensation of water on a face would wake the person up, or the gag reflex entering the airways would. If that didn't happen, then the drop in oxygen would cause the person to wake up. The prosecution called Coroner Updegrove, who carried out Sarah's autopsy, to give evidence about what he believed happened to Sarah that night. He testified that for Sarah to have a dry body and wet hair, one likely explanation would be that her head was pushed over the edge of the bathtub or toilet or sink. It may have been pushed either forwards or backwards, either in running water or full water. It was the prosecution's case that Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, and on that basis, he should be found guilty of her murder. It was the defense's case that there was no evidence to suggest that Ryan killed Sarah. They argued they were very much in love. There was no motive whatsoever for Ryan to kill Sarah. People who knew Ryan had never seen him get angry or raise his voice. Their friends believed they were happy together and making plans for the future. The defense had their own autopsy conducted. On August 15, 2008, 2 days after the initial autopsy was carried out, a second autopsy was performed by Dr. Werner Spitz. Dr. Spitz was retained by the defense. He agreed that the cause of Sarah's death was drowning, but in his opinion, he would have ruled her death as undetermined. Sarah's co-workers gave evidence and testified that she would sleep in her car before starting work in the mornings and go out to her car to sleep during her lunch break. They also testified that she had allergies and suffered from headaches and stomach pains. They recalled that on at least one occasion, her headache was so bad that her vision was blurred and she needed to go to a dark room until it went. Dr. Benjamin Messmer, a dentist at the practice, testified that he was working the day Sarah died, and he said that she complained of a headache and stomachache that day. Her friends also gave evidence and told the court that Sarah would fall asleep in unusual places such as at a game or when she was in the middle of a group talking. It was so bad that one of them told her she must have narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a sleep disorder characterized by excessive sleepiness, sleep paralysis, hallucinations, and in some cases episodes of cataplexy, partial or total loss of muscle control, often triggered by a strong emotion such as laughter. Sarah's mother, Ruth and Stewart, testified on behalf of the prosecution. She claimed that she never witnessed anything unusual about her daughter's sleep pattern. She did notice that she got headaches but believed this was a result of her sinuses acting up and nothing more. She said she spoke to Sarah the day she died when Sarah was on her way home from work and she never mentioned that she had a headache. Ruth testified that there was no history of seizures, heart disease, or cardiac problems in the family. Sarah had a heart murmur when she was a baby and had a cleft palate. But in June 2008, Sarah underwent a physical examination and there was no mention of a heart murmur still being present in the report. There was also no mention of any cardiac ailment, neurological defect, or disease. One of the prosecution's witnesses, Jennifer Crew, gave evidence. Jennifer contacted Ryan when he was in prison after she watched an episode of Dateline that had featured Ryan's case. According to Jennifer, Ryan called her at 11:06 p.m. on October 26, 2009. Jennifer told the court that he said, "I did it. I did it. I killed Sarah. I did it." Jennifer testified that Ryan told her that he fought with Sarah in the living room of their home in relation to his cheating, drinking, smoking, and pornography habits. According to Jennifer, the argument continued upstairs and Sarah told him their marriage was over. She claimed that as a result, the argument became physical and Ryan said, "Nobody leaves me. Nobody ever leaves me. And I mean nobody." Jennifer told the court that Ryan told her he punched Sarah in the chest, which caused her to fall back and hit her head. He blacked out and when he came to, Sarah was on the floor. She wasn't breathing and her hair was wet. Jennifer claimed that Ryan only pretended to attempt CPR when on the 911 call as he knew there was no point as Sarah was dead. She continued to have calls with him after that conversation. She reported the conversation to police after his second trial ended in a mistrial. The defense tried to discredit Jennifer's testimony and presented evidence in relation to her former prescription drug addiction and convictions for misdemeanor theft. The defense argued that they could not say or give an explanation as to what caused Sarah to drown that night. Dr. Smile testified on the defense's behalf and said that nationwide, there are approximately 300,000 episodes of sudden death a year. And of those episodes of sudden death, 1 to 2% occur in young people under 35. But 1/3 of those young people that die have normal autopsies. No evidence of any cardiovascular, respiratory, or central nervous system injury. There are certain situations where people die and their autopsy may never reveal the cause. The defense urged the jury to look at all the facts surrounding the case. Ryan had no reason to hurt Sarah. Ryan was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 15 years to life as prison. One of the jurors in the third trial said that it was Ryan's behavior in court was one of the biggest reasons he found him guilty. Ryan did not react when the autopsy photos were displayed in court. It was September 2nd, 2015, Wednesday. Kendra Hatcher, 35, pulled into the parking garage at Gables Park 17. She lived there and felt secure with its 24-hour concierge service and its vibrant, luxurious amenities, including a saltwater infinity pool, a fitness studio, and a gourmet coffee bar, all in uptown Dallas, Texas. Originally from Pleasant Plains, Illinois, Kendra had studied dentistry there before moving to Dallas for work. She had recently started a job at Smile Zone, which seemed ideal for her. With a strong Christian faith, Kendra aimed to use her dental skills to benefit others. Smile Zone provided high-end dental care to children from underprivileged backgrounds. In her spare time, Kendra taught Bible study and participated in volunteer programs, such as building churches abroad and offering free dental care to children in Ecuador. Kendra's professional and personal lives were flourishing. She was in a relationship with Dr. Ricardo Ricky Paniagua, who was completing a dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Although their relationship had only been a few months old, they had already talked about marriage. Kendra and Ricky had met on Tinder and had their first date on May 24th. And from that very first date, they were inseparable. They both had similar values and wanted the same things in life. That evening, the 2nd September, Kendra drove into the parking garage to park her car after work. She got there at 7:42 p.m. It was something she did every day, but she was excited for the weekend ahead as she had plans to spend that Labor Day weekend in Mexico with Ricky. But Kendra would never make it to Mexico. Just minutes after she drove into the parking garage, two men walking through the parking garage heard the sound of screams and shots fired. After the shots were heard, a Jeep Cherokee was seen speeding out of the garage. Hashim Saad, who lived in the apartment complex, heard the screams and called 911. When police arrived, they found Kendra's body in the parking garage. She had been shot dead. The initial thought was that it was a robbery as Kendra's coach purse was missing. Bullet shards and a handgun magazine were found on the ground beside her body. But as police investigated further and examined the scene, they thought the manner of the shooting did not suggest that it was a robbery. It seemed more like an execution-style shooting. The gunshot residue found indicated that Kendra had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The entry wound came from the upper part of her head and the bullet exited through her chin. But who would want to kill Kendra in an execution-style shooting? By all accounts, she was well-liked and helped anyone she could. Police obtained the security cameras at Gables Park 17. The footage showed a Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking garage at 7:15 p.m. The footage showed Kendra returning home and driving into that same garage at 7:42 p.m. The footage captured a man walking towards Kendra's car, and then that same man was captured on the footage returning to the Jeep. Police believed that that was the man who shot Kendra. The footage revealed that there was another person involved. The driver of the Jeep was a woman, and she drove out of the parking garage as soon as the man got back into the Jeep. But it wasn't clear enough to be able to identify them, so police released images of the Jeep and the driver to the media and appealed to the public for help. That appeal worked. A man named Jose Luis Ortiz contacted police and told them that the Jeep was his, but that he wasn't involved in any shooting and wasn't driving it at the time of the murder. Jose told police that on the morning of September 2nd, two friends of his named Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez asked if they could borrow his Jeep. He said that they told him that Crystal's car was having mechanical issues and they left the car with Jose for him to work on it, and he gave them his Jeep to use in the meantime. They were supposed to drop the Jeep back to him that evening after work, but instead, Brenda asked him to meet him at a Chili's restaurant that evening and he agreed. Crystal wasn't at the restaurant and neither was his Jeep. Jose told police that he was with Brenda at the restaurant at the time the shooting took place. The Jeep was returned to Jose's house later that night. They had no idea that his Jeep would be used as a getaway car. He said that the first time he became aware of it was when he saw the appeal the police made and recognized his Jeep. He asked Brenda about it and she told him that it wasn't his Jeep, but then later said that Crystal used it to go there to get drugs for somebody and probably something went wrong. Jose told police that Brenda urged him not to say anything as it was his Jeep and that he could get in trouble with the police and risk his citizenship. He felt that she was trying to manipulate him. According to Jose, Brenda suggested that he paint the Jeep a different color and she would pay for it. After speaking to Brenda, Jose reported the matter to the police. Police spoke to Brenda and asked her about Kendra. Brenda told police that she had no idea who Kendra was and never saw her before. They asked her where she was at 7:42 p.m. the night of September 2nd, and Brenda told police that she was at a Chili's restaurant with Jose and she showed them the receipts for the dinner. Police asked her about Jose's Jeep. According to Brenda, she gave the Jeep to Crystal. Police questioned Crystal. She was a 23-year-old single mother. They asked her if she was the woman seen on the footage driving the Jeep. She confirmed that she was. She initially told police that an armed carjacker got into the Jeep and forced her to drive to the parking garage that night. She told police her 9-year-old son was with her, but the footage showed that there was no child in the car. When police told her that, Crystal changed her story. She told police that there was no carjacking and she drove the man to the garage willingly but claimed that she thought it was just for a robbery. She insisted she knew nothing about the shooting. Police asked her why she agreed to drive there in the first place, even if she did believe it was for a robbery, and she told them that Brenda asked her to do it. Police asked her why Brenda would want to steal from Kendra, and she told them that Kendra was dating Brenda's former boyfriend. It's discovered that Brenda and Ricky dated on and off from 2012 until the beginning of 2015. When they separated, he began dating Kendra and Brenda wasn't happy. But Ricky had no idea that she was unhappy. He ended the relationship in February 2015 and dated other women. When he met Kendra in May, he knew it was serious. So he sent Brenda an email out of courtesy to let her know he was in a serious relationship. He didn't tell her Kendra's name, and Brenda seemed fine and told him that she hoped they would remain friends. As the questioning continued and the evidence mounted, Crystal wanted to make a plea deal and she agreed to testify in exchange for a shorter sentence. She told police that Brenda wanted Kendra dead and the murder was all her idea. According to Crystal, within 2 weeks of her meeting Brenda, they began planning Kendra's murder. Police discovered that Brenda wasn't just unhappy that her relationship with Ricky was over. She was obsessed and desperate to get him back. She pretended to Ricky that she was happy being friends, but her life had started to unravel. Her grades dropped and she missed work. She set about making it her full-time job almost to get Ricky back. She cyberstalked both Kendra and Ricky and hacked Ricky's email and discovered plans they were making and trips they booked. She grew to resent Kendra. She believed that Kendra had taken her place. According to Crystal, she made up her mind that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. Brenda asked Crystal if she knew anyone who could help, and Crystal agreed to help. They began making a plan to kill Kendra. They met up numerous times and devised multiple plans. The initial plan was to inject Kendra with heroin or a sedative, and then they discussed shooting her. Brenda asked Crystal if she could find someone to do it or if she knew anyone, as she was from a rundown area. They drove around and asked it a number of people if they could help. They later met a man named Christopher Love. He agreed to help and they discussed in different ways that they could kill Kendra. They made a unanimous decision that the best way to kill her would be to shoot her, as it would be fast. Crystal told police that Brenda agreed to give her $500 and she agreed to give Christopher money and drugs. Crystal told police that they chose to kill Kendra on the September 2nd as they were aware that Kendra and Ricky had plans for Labor Day weekend and would be leaving Dallas on the September 3rd to go to Mexico for a vacation. Brenda believed they had to do it before then, as she became aware that they made plans to move to San Francisco when they got back. Brenda knew about all of their plans and everything they did, as she had loaded Ricky's iPhone account onto another phone and used that to stalk him. Brenda told Crystal that she wanted the killing to look like a robbery gone bad. To decide where to carry out the killing, Brenda and Crystal decided to follow Kendra to see what her movements were like on a regular and normal day for her. They followed her to work. They sat outside a Salvation Army and used binoculars to monitor her movements while she was at work. After work, they followed her back and discovered how best to gain access into the parking garage. They figured out that they could easily get inside if they parked in a visitor spot first and then followed another car into the garage. They did that same routine for a few days to ensure that nothing changed. They were confident they knew exactly what Kendra would do on the September 2nd. The three of them, Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher, did one last run through the day before on the September 1st and timed it. They stole gloves, syringes, disinfectant spray, and wipes from Kendra's workplace. The next day, September 2nd, the plan was for Crystal and Christopher to carry out the murder alone. Early that morning, Brenda and Crystal collected the Jeep from Jose and picked up Christopher at a Jack in the Box. Brenda was dropped off at a library in Carrollton, and Crystal and Christopher went to Kendra's apartment complex alone. When they got there, they waited across the street for 30 minutes or so and drove to Kendra's place of work. Crystal left to pick up her son and nephew from school and dropped them off with her grandmother. She drove back to Kendra's place of work and followed her when she left. They lost her in traffic and they got back first, so they accessed the garage and waited for her there. As soon as Kendra drove in, Christopher got out of the car. He was wearing gloves and approached Kendra with the gun and shot her as she got out of the car. According to Crystal, she didn't actually see the shooting but heard it. They left, and after Crystal dropped Christopher home, she collected her son and later met Brenda at Cho's house, where she dropped back his Jeep. Foot of the deal Crystal made, she would be the star witness for the prosecution. There would be 2 trials. Christopher and Brenda were charged with capital murder, and their trials were heard separately. In exchange for her testimony and her guilty plea to a murder charge, Crystal was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Police found a gun hidden in a side compartment in Christopher's car. The gun was the one used to shoot Kendra. Due to that, Christopher was willing to talk. He told police that Brenda promised to pay him in both drugs and money, and that he was hired by her to shoot Kendra. Christopher was found guilty and sentenced to death. Before Brenda faced trial, she went on the run for almost 7 months. She was even featured on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. She was arrested in April 2016 in Torreon, Coahuila, Mexico. Mexico agreed to extradite her, but only on the basis that she would not face the death penalty. When she was extradited back to the United States, she was formally charged with capital murder. Her family and Ricky initially didn't believe that Brenda could be involved. They knew her as a loving woman, wholesome, and someone who had good family and Christian values. Ricky told police that when he ended the relationship with her, they remained friends, and he even sent her a text message the night Kendra was shot to let her know. She offered to help in any way she could. Brenda pleaded not guilty, and her defense argued that she wasn't even there when Kendra was shot and had an alibi and receipts to prove she was at a Chili's restaurant at the time of the murder. But it was the prosecution case that Kendra was killed as part of a murder for hire scheme orchestrated by Brenda. Brenda did not need to be there at the time of the shooting to be guilty of murder, and could still be found guilty as she planned and orchestrated the entire thing, and she was the person who hired Crystal and Christopher to carry out the murder. The court heard that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She saw her as being an obstacle to getting what she wanted. It was her desire to be back with Ricky. The court heard that in the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda had become increasingly obsessed with her and Ricky. Court heard testimony about that obsession from a number of people who knew Brenda. Her cousin Moses Martinez testified that Brenda was depressed after her relationship with Ricky ended. He testified that she offered to pay him if he hit Kendra with a baseball bat. He declined to do so. Brenda's friend Jennifer Escobar testified that Brenda was super obsessed with and angry towards Ricky when he ended their relationship. She told the court that Brenda would read through all of his emails and tracked his movements on her phone. She told the jury that Brenda had even kept a copy of his house key and had access to his bank accounts. Jennifer testified that Brenda asked her to eliminate Kendra Hatcher. She told the court that Brenda wanted her to either inject her with something fatal or use a bat and leave her in a coma. She told the court that Brenda offered to give her $2,000, a car and drugs if she would do it. Jennifer discussed the offer with her parents and then declined it. It was the prosecution case that Brenda asked a number of people to help her before she finally found someone to agree. It was their case that she took advantage of Crystal. Crystal was a struggling single mother who made $11 per hour, and she looked up to Brenda, a woman who had her own apartment and money, and wanted to be like her. The court heard that she gave Crystal $500, and police found the ATM withdrawal receipt for that amount in her belongings. She also paid Christopher. He was given a cash sum and $600 worth of marijuana and $300 worth of cocaine. 3 were told that Brenda was at Chili's the night Kendra was shot and went straight home afterwards. But the jurors were shown footage from a surveillance video from Jose's neighbor's house of the night of the murder. And the footage showed that Brenda was at Jose's house after Chili's, and she was there with Crystal, and they exchanged the Jeep for the car. The court heard that cell phone data also placed her with Crystal and Christopher before the murder, and that Brenda and Crystal contacted each other 99 times over a 2-week period. From the August 22nd to the September 4th, the jury deliberated for just 30 minutes and found Brenda guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It was December 16th, 2000, Saturday. Jerry Michael Mike Williams, 31, went on a duck hunting trip to Lake Seminole in Jackson County, Florida. Mike lived in Jackson County with his wife, Denise Williams. They had been high school sweethearts, married, and had an 18-month-old daughter. They had recently talked about having another baby. Mike worked as a real estate appraiser and enjoyed spending his free time on the boat. That Saturday, he told Denise he would be home in time for their vacation, which they had planned to Apalachicola, Florida, to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary. When Denise didn't hear from him by noon, she reached out to a few friends to help search for him. Denise said that Mike was duck hunting alone that day. A number of people helped search for Mike down at the lake. Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester, received a call from his father who told him that Mike was missing. He went out to the lake with his father with their boat to search for Mike. The search took place over the course of a few hours and the light was gone. But in the dark, they managed to find Mike's small motorized canoe on the lake's shore. A few yards from the lake, around 75 yards, they found Mike's Ford Bronco. It looked as if it had been parked there, but there was no sign of Mike anywhere. The search continued in the days, weeks, and months that followed. And Mike's hunting license, jacket, and waders were eventually found at the bottom of Lake Seminole. As there was no sign of Mike at all, police initially believed he may have drowned, and as such, they believed that his body would float to the surface a few days later. But that didn't happen. As that particular lake had a number of alligators, they thought that there was a strong possibility that he may have been eaten by alligators. As there was no body, the case was classified as a missing person investigation and remained that way until 2010. 6 months after Mike went missing, Denise asked Leon Circuit Judge John Crusoe to declare Mike dead. He granted her application and declared him dead. Denise told friends and family that she believed he was dead. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, did not believe her son was in the lake. She believed he was alive and she fought for the investigation to be reopened and looked at again. She took matters into her own hands and uncovered different leads, tracked them down, and even cross-checked their stories. She conducted her own investigation into her son's disappearance. Cheryl's persistence paid off. In 2010, police reclassified Mike's disappearance as a suspicious death, and the case was looked at again by a team of cold case investigators. The reason the investigation was reviewed was mainly based on Cheryl's investigation and some pieces of information that had been uncovered since Mike's disappearance. Police learned that Dennis received $1 to $75 million in life insurance after Mike's disappearance. But more concerning than that was the fact that, in 2005, Dennis married Mike's best friend, Brienne Winchester. When the cold case team looked at the details of the initial investigation, there were a number of things that troubled them. When Mike's boat was recovered, its engine was off, yet the gas tank was full. The manufacturer claimed that if the engine was on when Mike fell out of the boat, which is what police believed happened, it should have remained on until the fuel was exhausted. The fact that the engine was off but the tank was full indicated that the engine was turned off. Investigators also discovered that the very fact Mike was going to the lake alone that day was unusual. He normally never hunted alone. Furthermore, his truck was parked in an area that would have required him to drag his boat through mud, which didn't make sense as there was a concrete boat ramp close by. Mike's waders, hunting jacket, and flashlight were found after Mike was reported missing at the bottom of the lake between some torn weeds and alligator excrement. But the cold case investigators, looking at the case with a new perspective, believed that they may have been planted there so that it would add weight to the theory that Mike drowned and his body was eaten by alligators. Their theory was boosted by reptile experts who told them that North Florida alligators don't feed in the winter due to the colder temperatures and wouldn't consume a full-grown man without leaving a trace. But despite suspicion that Mike's disappearance may be more sinister than was previously believed, there was no physical evidence or DNA linking anyone to Mike's disappearance. It wasn't until 2016 when everything fell into place for the police in terms of the details of the investigation. Denise and Brian had separated and Denise filed for divorce. She no longer wanted to be with him, but one incident in particular brought everything to a head. On August 5, 2016, at 2:30 a.m., Brian hid in the trunk of Denise's SUV. When she opened it, she saw Brian had a gun. He only calmed down when Denise promised to stay with him. Denise went straight to the police to file a kidnapping report. When Brian was arrested and questioned in relation to the kidnapping report Denise filed, he was asked a number of details in relation to Mike's disappearance. He confessed that the day Mike was reported missing, December 16th, he was with him on the lake and he knew exactly what happened to him. He shot him. Prosecutors offered a plea deal to Brian. They believed Denise was involved in Mike's death and knew that there would be little chance of a conviction without Brian's testimony against her due to lack of evidence. Brian accepted the plea agreement in exchange for immunity in relation to Mike's murder on the basis that he would testify at Denise's trial. As a result of the deal, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but that sentence was for the kidnapping charge. He led police to where Mike's body was. His body was found where Brian said it would be. It was along the shores of Carr Lake in Leon County, and he had been shot in the head. Denise Williams was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and being an accessory after the fact. It was the prosecution's case that Mike was shot and killed on the lake on December 16, 2000. But while it was their case that Brian was the person who actually shot Mike, they told the jury that the shooting was the result of a plan concocted by both Brian and Denise. It was the prosecution's case that Brian and Denise were having an affair at the time and wanted Mike dead so that they could be together and collect almost $2 million in life insurance money. The court heard that Denise and Mike were high school sweethearts and were friends with another couple, also high school sweethearts, Kathy and Brian Winchester. Despite Denise and Brian being married to different people, they began an affair, and it was the prosecution's case that that affair resulted in Mikey's murder. Brian was the main witness for the prosecution. He told the court that his affair with Denise began at a Sister Hassel concert in 1997. He testified that when Hassel concert in 1997. He testified that when Kathy and Mike were outside the venue parking the car, he was inside the venue with Denise and they kissed. That was the beginning of an affair that continued for a number of years. They went on vacation a number of times together, met for lunch when they were at work, and went to each other's homes when there was nobody else home. Brian testified that the idea to kill Mike came to him one day when he was out on a hunting trip with him. Mike fell into a mud hole and Brian helped him to get out. He told Denise about it and said that if he wasn't there to help, Brian would not have made it out as the ground had collapsed beneath him and began to pull his body down like quicksand. And if Brian had not witnessed it or helped him, nobody would have known what happened to Mike. According to Brian, that conversation was the beginning of a number of conversations that he had with Denise about different ways they could get rid of Mike. Brian testified that Denise did not want a divorce due to personal beliefs and did not want to share custody of her daughter with Mike. He testified that they thought of different ways to kill Mike, and in a way that would allow them to collect the insurance money. Brian told the court that they spoke about Mike being involved in a possible boating accident. The week prior to the actual murder, Denise got cold feet and didn't want to go through with it. But a week later, on December 16th, Brian told the court that she encouraged Mike to go hunting that day. Brian testified that that day he met Mike near the lake and told him he had a special spot where they could go to. When they were out on the lake and when Mike stood up, Brian pushed him overboard. The plan was for Brian to push Mike off the boat and Mike would drown. But Mike didn't drown. He managed to grab hold of a tree stump. He stripped off his own heavy waders and hunting jacket to try to save himself and asked Brian to help. Brian went to the stump, took out his gun and shot Mike in the face. He shot him at 3 feet with a 12-gauge shotgun. Brian removed Mike's body from the lake and put his body in his car and drove back home with Mike's body beneath a tarp. He left Mike's boat on the lake so that police would think there had been an accident on the lake. That same morning, December 16th, Brian drove to a hunting spot he knew well at the edge of Carr Lake, with Mike's body still under the tarp, and stopped at Walmart on the way. He purchased a shovel and weights. When he got to Carr Lake, he found a mud hole where he hid Mike's body. He used the weights to hold down Mike's body. Brian and Denise kept their affair a secret after Mike was reported missing. They dated other people to try to avoid detection, but shortly afterwards, Brian and Kathy divorced. In 2005, he married Denise. Brian testified that they were paranoid after they got married and believed they were being watched. When he was called in for questioning when Mike's case was reopened, it was the beginning of the end. It became quite clear to me from that interview that they were suspicious of what happened, and not only that, they were suspicious of me and Denise. The court heard that Denise collected $1,750,000 from Mike's life insurance policies. One of the policies had been written by Brian himself in his capacity as an insurance agent. The jury was shown a document that showed Denise filed an insurance claim just 19 days after her husband went missing. The jury also heard recorded calls between Kathy and Denise, where Kathy accused her of being involved in Mike's murder. Denise changed the conversation, but the prosecution told the jury to pay attention to the fact that she did not deny it. It's not what she said, it's what she doesn't say. The prosecution asked the jury to use their common sense when making their decision on her guilt or innocence. It was the defense's case that Denise had nothing to do with Brian's plan to kill Mike, and it was Brian and Brian alone who both made the decision to kill and killed Mike. Denise's lawyer, Philip Padovano, told the jury that the only person to accuse Denise of conspiring to kill Mike was Brian. He reminded the jury that he was a confessed killer and a convicted kidnapper and has every motive to lie to you. Philip told the jury that the issue they would have to decide is whether or not they believed Brian. They did. After less than a day of deliberations, they found Denise guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and being an accessory after the fact. Denise was sentenced to life in prison. Denise appealed her conviction, and an appeals court reversed her conviction on the first-degree murder charge. While under Florida law, defendants can be charged with a crime even though they were not actually or constructively present at the commission of such offense. They overturned that part of the verdict on the basis that the state failed to produce competent and substantial evidence to prove that Denise was a principal to murder under state law. Her only ostensibly culpable conduct, e.g., consideration of ways to kill Mike, development of an alibi, agreeing to encourage Mike to go hunting with Brian, did not constitute commanding or impelling Brian to commit the murder or the assisting or encouraging of Brian at the time he actually was committing the offense. Essentially, the court ruled that the state failed to prove that Denise helped Brian commit the crime. They believed her involvement in the discussions prior to the murder and the fact she urged Mike to go hunting the day he was killed was not enough to meet the high bar required to prove she was a principal and as much to blame as Brian was. Because Denise did not do or say anything to aid or abet Brian in the murder of Mike, as those terms originally were understood to mean, and she did not counsel, hire, or procure Mike's murder beforehand, i.e., she did not get the ball rolling. We reverse her conviction as a principal to first-degree murder. Her conviction on another charge, the conviction for conspiracy to commit murder, was upheld, which meant that the sentence for that portion of the crime would remain intact and Denise would have to serve the 30-year prison sentence. Mike's mother, Cheryl, was distraught when she heard the news. "I am sick. I am literally ill. It's like nobody is responsible for Mike's murder." Kanai Kijima was born on November 27, 1974, in Nakashibutsu, Japan. She was the oldest of 4 siblings. While her relatives' names are not publicly known, it is revealed that her father worked as a notary public and her mother was a piano teacher. Kanai's parents hailed from affluent families and aimed to create a nurturing environment for their children, ensuring they had everything necessary as they grew. As the firstborn, Kanai received particularly special attention. Motivated by her mother's love for music, she dedicated countless hours to developing her piano skills. Kanai refined her technique, and her talent quickly became evident. She performed recitals on various stages and took part in esteemed competitions. However, music wasn't her only passion. By the age of 9, she had already mastered cooking. And this quality, according to her mother, boded well for her future as a wife. However, in order to raise a decent generation, her father imposed strict discipline at home, including limiting access to television. In addition, he gave them virtually no money for personal expenses. Hannah easily coped with the first harsh parental rules, was active and an excellent student. However, the problem of limited access to money was much harder for her to cope with. The girl was prone to luxury and wastefulness. Her father's strictness seemed unbearable to her, and soon she gave in to her instincts. In high school, she learned that her father kept $21,000 in cash at home and embezzled this money, which she then spent on clothes and handbags exclusive brands. As soon as her father found out, he punished Kanai by reducing her allowance. But contrary to her father's wishes, the girl did not regret it. But on the contrary, she craved even more money. This is how she got into the intriguing world of dating. Gaining courage, Kenai began to offer her company to older men in exchange for generous monetary rewards. In this context, she entered into a relationship with a man in his 40th, whose identity is unknown. Under his influence, Kenai stole the bank book of one of her classmates. The two of them then withdrew about $80,000 from it. When authorities discovered them, they were arrested and molested in court. But because Kenai was still a minor, she received probation. Despite this, she maintained an excellent academic record and graduated from high school. After that, she decided to move to Tokyo and enroll in the Faculty of Economics. However, Kenai's interest in studying disappeared almost immediately, and she dropped out of college. Nevertheless, the girl realized that the city fascinated her and did not want to leave. To make ends meet, she took several temporary and unstable jobs. One of them was working as a waitress at a fast food restaurant. The long hours, the harsh environment, and the low pay kept her busy. She constantly worried about how to pay the rent for the apartment, which she hated because it was very modest. It was only a matter of time before Kenya acquired a new nefarious habit. She would walk into a store and pretend to be a regular customer and steal cosmetics, books, and even money. Although she was caught several times, she managed to avoid arrest. These occasional thefts were not enough for the standard of living she aspired to. It was then that Kenya quit her job and decided to go to an escort club. These establishments offered services ranging from conversation and social gatherings to more intimate companionship. Clients were able to choose a woman based on the information provided, but with a height of 5 feet and a weight of 105 kilograms, Kenya did not fit into the accepted standards of beauty. She did not attract much attention at first, but that all changed when she met a pimp named Takeuchi, who became her mentor. He taught her how to satisfy a man, inspired her to create an entire marketing strategy, and told her that she needed middle-aged or older men with low self-esteem and no inclination to desire the women they really wanted. After realizing the value of her own skills and virtues, Kenya learned how to make emotional connections with her partners. She discovered that kindness and consideration fostered not only attention but also appreciation. Kenny became an expert in the art of seduction, skilled at reading people and understanding what they want. She discovered a new, unprecedented power within herself. At that time, Kenny took the pseudonym Sakiro and under it made up the story that her father was a professor at the prestigious Tokyo University, the most elite educational institution in the country. On other occasions, she posed as either a nurse, a therapist, or a famous chef. All of these fictionalized stories created a captivating image. In this new role, one of the clients was Sadao Fukuyama. They met in February 2001 in a bar, and their communication was so intense that within 2 weeks, they became lovers. But not only that, the man, previously characterized by his frugality and careful spending, made the mistake of trusting her. Kenny shamelessly took advantage of this. To begin with, she made up a story about the death of her parents in an airplane crash and told him that she could not pay the tuition at the music school in Boston, where she supposedly studied. Sadao promised to take care of all the expenses, and she in turn traveled from the US once a month to meet with him. The man looked forward to these visits, elegantly dressed and in love with the woman he thought was his fiancée. Kenya took the opportunity to empty most of his savings. A few years later, Realizing that she had already exhausted all of Sato's financial resources, Kania put an end to their relationship. Cunning and manipulative, she left no trace that would allow her to be discovered when the man suspected he was the victim of a hoax and tried to report her. The evidence was insufficient to prosecute the case. A few months afterward, in August 2007, Sado was late for work. Concerned, one of his co-workers went to his home and, upon entering, found him dead in the shower. When the news became public, Kania transferred $50,000 of her ex-fiancé's funds into her bank account. Since the police were never able to determine the cause of death, the case was filed as a domestic accident. In 2008, Kania became interested in the development of the internet in Japan, and after analyzing the obvious advantages of the virtual world, she decided to change her strategy. She created a profile on the main local social networks dedicated to finding a partner under the pseudonym Sakura. In her description, she made it clear that she was looking for a serious relationship to start a family. Kania was well aware of the characteristics and needs of her potential victims. She knew that they were mostly men with high work and social pressures, high incomes, and emptiness in their souls. Moreover, her strategy was to adapt to the situation and change arbitrarily depending on the preferences of her interlocutors. In this sense, Kania sometimes presented herself as a young woman looking for true love, a talented penis, or a pet store owner with a passion for cooking. It didn't take her long to become a real virtual celebrity. Especially her profile was liked by mature and elderly men who wanted to give a worthy meaning to their old age. One of those who fell in love with Kani was Takao Terada, a 53-year-old systems engineer who lived in a suburb of Tokyo. Since his daily life was limited to commuting home from work and the only people he socialized with were his mother and sister, in February 2008, Takao decided to try to meet someone online. 2 months later, Kania sent him an invitation to chat and expressed hope for a future marriage. But first she asked for financial help to cover some expenses. At the same time, Kania posed as a nurse and caregiver for the elderly, answering ads posted on the internet. Kenzo Ando, 80, lived in Noda City, Chiba Prefecture. Although his income was low, he came from a respected family, and his father was a famous artist from whom he inherited valuable works. In addition, Kenzo suffered from some health problems. On their first communication, Kania sent him a carefully retouched photograph that barely showed a part of her body. Kenzo was impressed and hired her as his caregiver and cook. Kania not only cooked a special meal for him, but was willing to do anything to please him. In this way, she won his loyalty and appreciation. After a month, Kania approached Kent for a loan, saying that the money was needed to pay for her university fees. Without a moment's hesitation, he handed over all his savings to her. At the same time, she was defrauding other men. In all cases, their names have not been made public, but it is known that their ages range from 40 to 50 years old. At the time when Takao was dreaming of a life together, Connie already had her own plan, and it was quite different. After buying electric stoves online, she arranged to meet him at his house and took sleeping pills with him before the day. After cooking dinner for both of them, she dissolved a few pills in the food. A few minutes later, Takao passed out. Kania dragged him into his room, closed all the doors and windows, set up the stoves, put charcoal on them, and turned them on. Before leaving, she transferred $121,000 from Takao's account to her own bank account. She also took her house keys and computer. 5 days later, on February 4th, 2009, Takao's supervisor came to his home to see if everything was okay. Receiving no response, he contacted the local authorities and Takao's lifeless body was found. After analyzing the call history, investigators discovered that Yoshiyuki only had his mother, sister, and Kanaya under the alias Sakura on his contact list. When officers contacted Kanaya, she reported that Yoshiyuki was emotionally unstable and had likely passed away after experiencing heartache over her rejection of his proposal. Since there were no signs of violence, this version seemed logical to the police. And as a result, the investigation was not continued. After coming out of the coma, Kenzo returned home. On the evening of May 15, 2009, Connie visited him, sat with him as usual, and busied herself with cooking dinner. But this time, she added a special ingredient to his meal: sedatives. Once Kenzo fell asleep, she locked him in his room and repeated the procedure with the electric stoves, as she had done with her other victims. Before leaving, she accessed Kenzu's bank account and transferred $13,000 to her own. This time, one of the electric stoves caught fire, and the flames engulfed the entire house. Kenzu died instantly from the fatal burns. A subsequent autopsy revealed that the man had consumed an unusual amount of sleeping pills, although he had never used such drugs before. Despite this, authorities ruled his death an accident. In the meantime, Kenny continued to blog, seeking out new victims online. In July 2009, Izuki Uide stumbled upon her account and, unable to resist her charms, sent her a message. Izuki was a 41-year-old bachelor who earned income from renting out the family property and was very close to his mother, who lived in Fujima. Hani introduced herself to him as a graduate student, and they started chatting. 2 days after meeting, they met and their relationship grew rapidly. They announced their engagement and began making plans for a wedding. As part of the prenuptial agreement, Kenny asked Izuki to wire $30,000 to pay for her graduate school tuition. On August 5, 2009, they took a trip to Fujima, where they planned to spend 3 days. It was a particularly important date for them, and Connie was preparing a fancy dinner to celebrate. Unbeknownst to Izuki, she had added sleeping pills to his food. Upon arriving in Fujima, when they pulled into the parking lot, the sleeping pills began to take effect on Izuyuki, and he fell asleep. Connie left him in the car, turned on the electric charcoal stove, and left. She forgot to leave her keys in the car, and a surveillance camera recorded her leaving. After that, Kenny stole $35,000 from Eisuki's account. Police initially thought that Eisuki left his life voluntarily, but when they discovered his car keys were missing and found no note explaining his actions, suspicions began to mount. Analysis of his blog also indicated that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. When police gained access to the surveillance footage, they were able to expose Kanye's return. However, the lack of additional cameras prevented important evidence from being uncovered. A thorough investigation began focusing on Connie. Then, when Eisuki's computer was analyzed, it was revealed how they met. When investigators approached Connie, she stated that she had met Eisuki the day before she left him alone. She also speculated that after she left, the man might have done something to get away with it. But despite Kanai's statement, the police decided to launch a thorough investigation, gathering information on all the deaths and fraud cases that linked her to those involved. On September 15, 2009, Kanai again made contact with another 43-year-old man on a virtual platform. However, his name remained unknown in this case. The girl posed as an American student studying cooking in Japan. She also led one to believe that she had family problems and financial difficulties in paying her tuition fees. Finally, Kanye informed him that she was willing to give up everything, including her studies, to be with him. Next day, her lover sent her $17,000. A few days later, Kanye moved into his house. In doing so, she purchased 2 electric stoves. She then cut all the fire alarm wires in the house. Kanye's plan was thwarted when on September 23, 2009, the fiancé's sister arrived at the residence with the idea of staying for a few days. The girl immediately became suspicious of her new sister-in-law and tried to convince her brother not to continue the relationship. The case worsened when he told her about the strange circumstances of acquaintance and the money he lent her. The sister then decided to follow her intuition and told the police everything she knew. On September 25th, police officers arrived at the residence and arrested Kania on fraud charges. When they searched the room, they found that all of the alarm devices had been disabled, indicating that the girl was about to perform a characteristic procedure. The search also uncovered various medications, including several classes of drowsy and sedative medications. In addition, investigators found all online purchases of stoves on her computer. This evidence provided a direct link to previous cases, thus making her the prime suspect in Yoshiyuki's death. In January 2010, As the investigation into the unusual deaths continue, Kenny was charged with multiple counts of fraud. A month later, she was charged with murder, specifically in the death of Takao. Although an autopsy was never performed in that case, the charge was based on a lack of clear evidence of the cause of death, leading to an unusual situation. During the trial, she pleaded not guilty, claiming that their deaths were accidental or a personal decision by the men. This was consistent with the strategy of her defense, which sought an acquittal, citing a lack of hard evidence. In the absence of such direct evidence, as well as witnesses and confessions, the prosecution emphasized the importance of circumstantial evidence, such as her presence with the victims before their deaths and the similarity of the causes of death. All tests on the body showed that the men had consumed a drug that was also found in Kanya's possession. The prosecution also said that the girl received large loans from her 3 victims and killed them to avoid paying back the money. According to prosecutors, Kanya used charcoal from electric stoves to poison the 3 victims to confuse authority, as death by poisoning is a common way of passing away in Japan. Finally, on April 13, 2012, a jury found Kenny guilty of murdering the 3 men and sentenced her to death. Doomed to the death penalty, Kenny continued to blog. In it, she continued to talk about her experiences and the fame she gained, even financial support from some fans willing to improve her living conditions. Incredibly, one of her fans who gave her financial support ended up marrying Kenny. This happened in 2015, and the man was reportedly around 60 years old. However, after an accident, he became disabled, making it impossible for him to continue supporting her financially. Kanya then divorced him. Kanya also used her time behind bars to write her memoirs, which were then published weekly in a women's magazine. At the same time, she published an autobiographical novel, Praise. 100 days after her divorce, Kanya married again, this time to a real estate entrepreneur. But after a few months, they divorced. In 2018, Kanya decided to marry again. And in this case, the chosen one was a 40-year-old man who worked at the publishing house responsible for publishing her book. While awaiting her execution, Kanye continued to lead an active and controversial life, generating both admiration and condemnation. Sophie Lyon was born in France in 1996. When she was quite young, her parents divorced and her mother remarried, resulting in another child. Sophie grew up in the countryside east of Paris with her mother, stepfather, younger brother, and older stepsister. She was a simple, quiet, and shy girl who preferred to avoid social interactions, had few friends, and often struggled to communicate even with her own family. Her mother noted that she frequently tried to engage Sophie in conversation, asking about her day and what she learned at school. However, Sophie mostly replied with short phrases or one-word answers. Although there were rare moments when she shared more about her daily experiences and feelings, they were infrequent. Nevertheless, Sophie connected very well with other children. She enjoyed their company and maintained strong relationships with them. She seemed happy, and it was evident that this was her favorite thing to do. So after finishing middle and high school, Sophie studied early childhood education, hoping to find work related to children. She started looking for such opportunities, but couldn't find anything she liked or that was specifically related to children. So, Sophie began working as a cashier in a supermarket because she needed to financially support her family. She didn't want to remain unemployed, and while she was searching for an opportunity to do what she truly enjoyed, she thought it was a good option. After some time, she found a job listing thanks to a friend. A family in London was looking for a nanny who spoke French to look after their 2 young children, a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. The couple consisted of Sabrina Kadir and Wissam Majuni, whom everyone called Sam. Sabrina was involved in the fashion world in London and worked as a makeup artist for celebrities. Sam, on the other hand, had been a financial analyst at a bank but had already quit his job by the time they sought a nanny. He had used his savings to buy 2 apartments that the family rented out. They lived in a prestigious area of London, and their financial situation was very good, maintaining a high standard of living. Sophie saw this as the perfect job. She would practice her English, which she had been studying, and take care of 2 children, which was what she wanted to do. At first, her mother didn't want to let her go, saying it wasn't a good idea to travel far to a foreign country with strangers. However, Sophie's determination was so great that her parents eventually agreed to let her take the job. In January 2016, when Sophie was only 20 years old, she arrived in London. In the first months of her stay in London and throughout the year 2016, Sophie was very content with this family and was happy with the children. Neighbors living nearby said they saw in her a girl who was very dedicated to her work. Of course, in London, she had very little social life. There were many nannies who would get together on weekends to socialize. They also interacted with each other when they took the children to the park or school. But Sophie always kept her distance. She was very engrossed in her work. Sophie was supposed to return home to France in September 2017. But in May 2017, she wrote a letter to her mother stating that she was no longer happy with the family she worked for. According to Sophie, Sabrina accused her of stealing from her, reduced her salary, didn't allow her to go anywhere, and didn't give her the allotted time off. So Sophie's mother bought her a plane ticket and sent it to her, but Sophie didn't use the ticket. For the next few weeks, almost nothing was heard from Sophie, although in previous months, she had been very communicative with her family, sending postcards, letters, and emails. Over time, these messages became less frequent, and her parents became very worried about her. On Wednesday, September 20th, 2017, a barbecue was being prepared in the backyard of Sabrina and Sam's house. The problem with this barbecue was that the smell began to become quite strange, and moreover, the smoke coming from the family's garden was too strong. Some neighbors knocked on the door and found Sam alone. He said he was grilling chicken and lamb and assured them not to worry because there was always too much smoke when he barbecued, as he didn't know how to use it properly. However, one of the neighbors didn't believe this and called the fire department. Everyone was afraid that the fire would spread to neighboring houses or that someone would be poisoned by the smoke. When the firefighters arrived, they went inside and asked Sam what he was doing. One of the photos showed that he was grilling chicken. The firefighters found it very strange that such strong smoke was coming from chicken and lamb, so they examined the remains on the grill. When they looked closely, they saw fingers and what seemed to be a nose. They called the police, and these bones turned out to be human remains. At that moment, Sam was taken into custody and sent to the police station. As he was being transported, more law enforcement personnel arrived. The street was completely blocked, and the neighbors started wondering what could have happened. Suddenly, the police brought out something that looked like a body covered with tarpaulin from the garden. A few days later, it was confirmed that it was the body of Sophie Lyon, who was 21 years old at the time. Sam and Sabrina were both arrested, and the months of torture and suffering that the young Frenchwoman had endured in this couple's home were revealed. As usual, a forensic examination was conducted to determine the cause of death, the day of death, and what had really happened to Sophie. Initially, it was assumed to be murder, a conclusion confirmed by the examination. Sophie had several fractures of the sternum, ribs, clavicle, and jaw, and these fractures were several days old. Unfortunately, the exact cause of Sophie's death couldn't be determined 100% because her body had been severely burned. It was also impossible to determine the day of her death. It didn't take much effort to understand that Sam and Sabrina were clearly responsible for her death. Now, it was necessary to find out what had happened and how it had occurred in order to begin the legal process and bring justice to Sophie, who deserved it. Following the results of the forensic examination, 2 days after the discovery of the body, Sabrina and her husband Sam were charged with the murder of Sophie Lyon. The trial revealed much about the conditions in which Sophie had lived in her last few months in London. Much attention was paid to Sabrina's personality. Sabrina, like Sophie, started her career as a nanny. Afterward, she began working as a makeup artist and became involved in the fashion world in London, working with celebrities. She had a son with the singer Mark Walton, who was a member of a boy band at the time. They fell in love, dated, and had a son, Sabrina's older child, whom Sophie took care of. In 2013, their relationship ended, and they broke up. Mark told Sabrina that he didn't want anything to do with her, which led to a complete change in Sabrina's personality. According to several people who knew her since she started dating Mark, She became very unstable, behaved strangely, had several episodes of anger, and often became angry with people without any apparent reason. Sabrina also began to stalk Mark, knowing where he was, calling him constantly, and wanting to remain part of his life. But he repeatedly rejected her. While she was still obsessed with Mark, she began a relationship with Sam. Sam and Sabrina had known each other for many years, and after a few months of their relationship, Sabrina became pregnant. She moved into Sam's apartment, where their daughter was born and where Sophie lived later. As the girl grew up a bit, they decided to hire a nanny to help them. Externally, Sabrina and Sam's life seemed perfect, but in reality, they had many problems. As I mentioned earlier, Sam worked as a financial analyst at a bank. He quit his job because Sabrina told him that he spent too much time at work and there was not enough time for the family. However, when Sam left his job, their income apparently became less than what Sabrina was used to. She wanted to go to dinners with celebrity, buy expensive dresses, and while she could afford a relatively luxurious life thanks to her own work, she wanted more and more. Furthermore, for many years, she continued to pursue Mark. Sabrina had reached the point where she had concocted the idea that her ex, Mark Walton, was a child abuser, an exploiter of people, and just a very bad person in general. Clearly, she had no evidence of any of this, and all the accusations were deemed false. In 2017, Mark Walton decided to move from London to the USA. When Sabrina found out about this, she became very angry. He was in America and she was in London, and she could no longer control him, didn't know where he was or who he was with. Sabrina couldn't keep tabs on him, couldn't stalk him, or call him like she had done for the past few years. And so, she began venting all her anger on Sophie. At first, Sabrina accused her of things like stealing from the house. She also told her that she didn't do things on time, that she cooked poorly, that she was always late picking up the kids from school. Anything just to have an excuse to treat her poorly and yell at her. Soon, the verbal insults escalated into physical violence. It was revealed that not only Sabrina, but also Sam had repeatedly beaten Sophie. They kicked her, slapped her, beat her with cords, and the girl began to suffer greatly. In addition, they deprived her of food, didn't allow her to bathe, and even cut her salary. According to several people who had seen Sophie in recent months, she always wore the same clothes, was very unkempt, didn't maintain hygiene, all because these people didn't give her the opportunity to live a normal life. Sophie's free time was also restricted, and to some extent, she was locked in the house, only going out to take the kids to school, pick them up, take them to sports classes, and do shopping for the family. After that, she was completely isolated from the world. Sabrina even repeatedly prohibited her from talking to her family. The court presented recordings that help confirm this. On these recordings, made with Sam and Sabrina's mobile devices, you can hear them verbally abusing Sophie, as well as physically assaulting her.
Imagine yourself every day in a cage like an animal. You will not go back to France until you've told me the truth. I'm going to spoil your life as you have spoiled mine. I'm going to kill you, okay? Be quick! You better know that we will not let you go back until we know the whole truth. Nothing but the truth.
In addition to the audio recordings, photos were found on all the family's electronic devices, computers and phones, showing how Sophie changed over time, becoming thinner and more emaciated. She was already quite slim before, but in this last photo that you are now seeing on your screens, she looked very awful. Obviously, Sophie was not healthy, neither physically nor emotionally. According to the girl's mother, when she saw her daughter's photo, it reminded her of people who had been in concentration camps. Sophie endured several months of torture, but she remained silent out of fear of Sabrina, as her mother claimed that she had repeatedly threatened her. The woman threatened to send her to prison, harm her parents, and much more. She even claimed that Sophie had a secret relationship with Mark Walton, and that she let him into the house when no one was there. Sabrina wanted so badly to destroy her ex-partner that she forced Sophie to write a letter in which she allegedly confessed to having a secret relationship with Mark Walton. And all of this happened because he made her do it and promised her roles in movies and TV series in exchange for a sexual relationship. Obviously, this was impossible. Mark Walton didn't even know about Sophie's existence and moved several months after her arrival in London. As I mentioned earlier, the exact date of Sophie's death was not known from the autopsy results. But thanks to the investigation and what was said in court, it became somewhat clear when this happened. According to the prosecution's version, it was the evening of September 19th. Several surveillance cameras captured Sabrina and Sam on September 20th when the body was found by the barbecue. You can see Sam taking the children to school that morning. Then, after classes, Sabrina took them to a small playground. It seemed like she deliberately delayed coming home. Sam also went to the grocery store to do some shopping. Sophie usually took care of all these tasks. That's why they hired her. Therefore, prosecutors believe that Sophie was already dead at that time. It can also be assumed that there was a certain premeditation in the murder. Sabrina was texting one of her friends, and this friend asked her if Sophie had any friends who would be willing to work for her, cook, walk the dogs, do house cleaning, and spend time with her daughter. Sabrina replied that Sophie no longer worked for them and hinted in the message that things had not ended well. This happened on September 15th, 5 days before the police arrested Sabrina and her husband. Regarding their testimonies, they both accused each other. Sabrina told the story that on the night of September 19th, she went to sleep. Sam was arguing with Sophie because she hadn't prepared dinner the way he wanted and had done it wrong. Sabrina went to sleep and didn't hear anything more about the argument. According to her, when she woke up in the middle of the night, she heard noise in the bathroom. It was Sam drowning Sophie. Sabrina told the authorities that she couldn't save the girl because when she entered the bathroom, Sophie was already almost dead. Sam told the same story, but in his version, the person who argued with and drowned Sophie was not him, but Sabrina. They both told the same story, blaming each other. Then, the prosecution brought in a crucial witness, Sabrina and Mark Walton's son, the eldest child in the house. The boy said that on the night of September 19th, he heard Sabrina and Sam arguing with Sophie, and then both of them took her to the bathroom, and he heard the nanny screaming for help. Thanks to this testimony, the prosecution was able to establish that Sophie's death occurred on September 19th, and that Sam and Sabrina drowned her in the bathroom. As I mentioned earlier, although they didn't plan it, Sabrina to some extent already knew that it might happen, which is why she was telling her friends that Sophie no longer worked for them. After reviewing witness testimony, audio recordings, and the case timeline, the jurors were tasked with making a decision. After deliberating for 30 hours, they found Sam and Sabrina guilty of Sophie Lyon's murder and sentenced them to 30 years in prison. Sabrina even penned a so-called farewell letter to Sophie, expressing a wish for her to be in a better place. For Sophie's friends, family, and acquaintances, this gesture felt like a mockery, clearly demonstrating Sabrina's lack of remorse for taking Sophie's life. Information regarding the custody of the two children remains unclear, and it's possible that it was not made public. However, we can only hope they are placed with individuals who love and support them, helping them navigate this difficult period after witnessing their parents' cruel treatment of Sophie. Emily Parker was born and grew up in the serene town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Parker, were esteemed members of the community. Richard ran a local hardware store, while and worked as a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother named Jack and a younger sister named Sarah, was cherished by her parents. From a young age, Emily showed a great enthusiasm for life. She was an outstanding student, excelling academically and engaging in a variety of extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching developed during high school, influenced by a history teacher who vividly brought the past to life. Emily followed her aspiration by attending Ohio State University, where she obtained a degree in education. After graduation, Emily returned to Maplewood and landed a teaching role at the local elementary school, where her commitment to her students was unmatched. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year, David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. Grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort. Their bungalow, perched on the edge of a secluded, the first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic, soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim, She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story, while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming, but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague who requested anonymity mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds' double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs, detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate, but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches. Although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove, Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became a champion for domestic abuse victims, sharing her experience to aid others in similar circumstances. Although the media's interest in her life eventually... Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.